So today, you got your first gimbal. You're all excited and shivering with anticipation as you unwrap this holy grail. You take it out and it smells good. You probably have no idea how to balance the gimbal properly, but you're too excited. Just put the camera on. You then proceed to shoot everything and anything in sight.
Jess, what are you doing?
Yep, that's right. You realize you look like a headless chicken. Bonk! So today, we're gonna share with you 5 basic gimbal moves that you could do to start your gimbal journey so that you can elevate yourself from this to this. Number 1 is the push-in shot. It requires you to push in your camera towards your subject. You might say, Jason, that's such an easy shot. Any idiot could pull this off. But when you understand when to use this shot and how to execute it properly, its impact on its audience can be astounding. You can use this shot to introduce a scene or emphasize on the importance of a subject. One of the best ways to compose this camera movement is use foreground. Foregrounds such as walls or nature really adds depth into your shot and makes your camera movement feel more dynamic. And what happens if we do the opposite, pushing out? This camera movement works well in revealing what is happening in your scene. It can be something wonderful where the character is in awe in his or her surroundings. Number 2 is the parallax. This is a slightly more complex movement because it requires you to orbit around the subject while keeping your subject at the center of your frame. The parallax adds a lot of dynamic movement into your shot, and it is a good way to show the environment your subject is in. Make sure that your focus is centralized on your subject at all times. Try experimenting with this movement by changing up the angle of your camera or the actions of your subject. Number 3 is the tracking shot. This shot requires you to move with your subject. And there are several ways you could do this. You can track the subject from behind, from the front, from the side, 45 degrees from the subject. When executed purposefully, this camera movement is super engaging as it raises 2 questions. Where your subject is going and what will happen when they get there. Number 4 is the boom shot. To execute this shot, you're either lifting the camera up or panning the camera down. It is recommended that you use a foreground for this shot, as this camera movement is great for revealing your subject, environment, or a detail. Number 5 is the ground level shot, and this is definitely my favorite one. Because when you pair a gimbal movement with a ground level shot, your shot will look very dynamic. This is because the ground acts as a foreground in your frame, making your camera movement very prominent to the viewer. So now that we've shared with you these 5 basic gimbal moves, go out and try them out. And after finding out they're actually not that hard, I challenge you guys to form combinations with them. And this is where some of the more advanced gimbal movements come into play. You can do the pan down parallax shot, a follow shot on ground level and then panning up, and also the barrel follow shot. And moving on, I just want to share with you some tips and tricks that could help you guys execute your gimbal moves better. Tip number 1, do the ninja walk. If you're just walking normally, you might find that there might be jitters in your footage. What you want to do is really have your knees slightly bent and you want to walk with your heel to toes. This will make your movement smooth and prevent jitters in your gimbal shots. The second tip is to balance your gimbal correctly. This might be the case if you're still experiencing jitters in your footage, even if you're doing the ninja walk. I used to never care about this too much, and as such, some of the footages that I took back then are super shaky, and you know what's the worst? If you don't balance your gimbal correctly, it can really hurt the motors of your gimbal in the long term. And please, balance your gimbal correctly, and if you're unsure how to do so, I'm sure you can look up dozens of YouTube videos online teaching you how to balance a gimbal. So the last tip I can give you is that you can upgrade your gimbal by adding accessories to it. Think of it like like an extra cage to your camera. You can add a monitor or dual handles to allow yourself to do a better job shooting. And make sure you know what each accessory does before you buy them. The very last thing I want you to do is when you buy an equipment, you use them a couple of times and you're like, damn, it doesn't really suit me. So you just chuck them in your storeroom and it stays there for perpetually. As always, thank you so much for watching. We hope that you find these 5 basic gimbal moves useful and practical. There's so many gimbal moves out there, and if you can think of one that we haven't covered, feel free to comment down below.
Now, if you want to hear more about our journey of how Jason and I went from complete beginners to full-time filmmakers, please sign up to our email newsletter, link in the description box down below. In our newsletter, we go deep into our story and share all aspects from personal insights, stories, struggles, you name it. We would love to have you in our community.